Hello, everyone arriving in. Hello and welcome back. Before we kick off this evening, as always, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all meeting this evening. I'm coming to you this evening from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Jane and our first guest, Nikki, are on Camaragal country, and our other guest, Richard, is on Ngunnawal country. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present and extend a particularly warm welcome to any members of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities joining us here this evening. Wherever we're all zooming in on this evening, the dozens of us here everywhere across Australia, we are all on First Nations country and sovereignty was never ceded. So welcome back, everyone, to yet another wonderful installment of Reasonings with Jane. I am Hannah Ma, and I'll be facilitating the Q&A again this evening. And of course, our host tonight is the effervescent Jane Caro, our lead. I need to come up with a new introduction for you every week. I like
effervescent. Go with that.
Jane is, of course, our lead candidate for the Senate in New South Wales for Reason Australia. So welcome back, Jane.
Thank you, Hannah.
And joining Jane tonight, we have two highly experienced independent economists to help us unravel last night's federal budget. Nikki Hutley is the president of the New South Wales branch of the Economic Society of Australia, and she brings over 3 decades of economic expertise to the webinar this evening. Welcome, Nikki.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Hi, Jane. Richard.
And Dr. Richard Dennis is the Chief Economist and former Executive Director of the Australia Institute. He's also an author and a respected commentator on public policy. So welcome, Dennis.
Thank you.
Richard.
Oh, sorry, Richard Dennis. Goodness.
But Richard's one of those annoying people with 2 first names. So
I'm annoying for so many reasons, Jane. That is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, we can edit that out for the YouTube version. It's fine.
Oh no, leave it in, it's gold.
As always, at the end of the discussion, we will be having a Q&A section. So for those of you watching along at home, if you have any questions at all for our experts this evening, you can pop them into the Q&A section. Not in the chat. There is a chat section that you can use to chat as well, but in the Q&A section, you can ask the questions just to make sure we see them. But until then, you can sit back and enjoy a wonderful conversation, and I'll hand it over to you, Jane, to take it away.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Well, I'm going to start, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the budget, I'm going to start by asking Nikki, who you were actually in the budget lockup, weren't you?
I was, yes, entrenched, embedded, as they say, with the ABC team.
Oh, cool. What's the mood like? What does it feel like? You know, and what did you gauge from? I hate this word, but I can't think of another one. The vibe.
It's always interesting and it's different every year. I mean, it's very nerdy. I like to call the budget Christmas for economists because, you know, we do get incredibly excited and I think it was particularly apt this year because there was a lot of tinsel and sparkle and flashing lights in the budget document itself. I mean, it's always a mad scramble at 1:30. It's going to be have your phones confiscated and everyone's, you know, what are we expecting? What do we already know? There's a lot of leaks, and then you get the document and everyone's sort of scrambling to go, what's this number? What's that number? And then once you've got over that initial first half hour or so of everyone sort of trying to find the big things, then we start to meticulously, you're in there for 6 hours. So you're going through very, and there's like thousands of pages of documents here. So you're trying to find what are the key trends, what's hidden in the numbers. And, you know, I tend to start with budget paper number 1, and there are many of them. I ignore the Treasurer's speech because it's full of fanciful pictures, and go through and just look at the cold hard numbers. Where are we going? What's the picture of debt? What's the economic forecast assumptions? And then try and get into the nitty gritty of the actual measures themselves. So when they say they're going to spend X on something, you know, what is it actually costing us? You know, what does it do? How long is it in there? Because the spin in the speech doesn't tell you half of this. But of course, the average person is not necessarily that interested in this, except how it affects their hip pockets. But there's some really important initiatives here that affect all Australians, not in the sense of you'll get another $420 from your Lamington, you know, tax offset on the 1st of July or thereafter, but in the sense of where the economy is going, you know, where are the big bucks going and where aren't they going? Not to climate change, I can tell you that. But, you know, to what are these, you know, modern manufacturing, the big dreamy words, what does it actually mean and where is this money being spent? You know, infrastructure spending, you know, what's it actually doing? Who's it going towards? How's it going to change our lives? So it's always exciting. It's always a vibe. Everyone sort of, when you find a nugget yourself, you go, hey, have you seen this? But lots of exchanges of ideas and stuff. I'm sorry, it is nerdy, but it's great.
It's nerdy, but it's great. I like that. It's good. So I'm going to start with an attempt to be positive, and I'm going to ask you, Richard, is there anything in this budget that you like?
Well, I just want to say I was in the lockup too, and I think
sorry,
that's all right. For me, it's like the HSC exams. You're in a room with all these people, and it's all very hushed at the beginning as everyone reads and reads, and by the end, everyone's like, you know, who cares? Just I'm finished. My hand's tired. Look, there's lots in here. Let's start with the good news. We're rich. We're one of the richest countries in the world. Yesterday's budget outlined the Treasurer's plan for how to spend $630 billion. $630,000 million was what's budgeted to be spent by this small government in the next 12 months. Now, with that, of course, we can do anything we want. And the point of a budget is to say, well, what are our priorities? What are we going to do with it? What aren't we going to do with it? So the good news is we can do anything. We can tackle climate change. You know, there's $11 billion of fossil fuel subsidies in that budget. We could spend that on renewables tomorrow. Wouldn't cost us an extra cent. So the good news is, you know, we've come through COVID far better than people would have thought. We've got very low unemployment. In terms of trade, the prices the world want to pay us for iron ore and copper and coal are all at record highs. So despite the crisis, we're actually swimming in cash. This is a good problem to have. And of course, the political problem that the Treasurer's got is we've got low unemployment, we've got high levels of revenue, and we've got a really big deficit. Now, I'm not personally worried about the size of that deficit, but all of this talk that we heard that, all the spending during the crisis was temporary and targeted. No, it wasn't, because revenue's back to where it should be and we've got a big deficit. The problem is that all of that extra money went on gas-fired recoveries and cash for Harvey Norman and, you know, school chaplains and, you know, more equestrian arenas for private schools. And we haven't spent it on the good stuff that we really need that would really set us up for the future.
Do you agree with that analysis, Nikki, that we haven't spent the money on the good stuff?
Yeah, look, I think there were one or two little gems. I don't think it hurts to have the offsets for small business for, not so sure about the training when you've got unemployment this low, you know, what are you doing? But we do talk about skills. So, you know, getting an offset for training and for digital investment. The trouble with these initiatives is you don't have any control over the quality of them. They go to the company, not the individual. So there's always the question, and it's one of the things we never do with budgets or with any of these big things. We say, let's go and spend on roads. This will improve productivity. When you think about how much we've spent on roads in the past, where is the productivity growth that, you know, I mean, when you
start, we're at decent roads.
Well, and that too, but you know, we know that these cost benefit analyses, business cases are done on time travel savings, a lot of which is about utility rather than productivity. You know, but we never go back and say, we said this stuff would happen. What is happening? And there's no, you know, we talk about the need for an ICAC for integrity around decisions, and that is, it's not just about whether you give money to a Labor or a Liberal electorate. It should be around the quality of the spending that we have. So I'd like to see that. But yeah, look, you know, there was a lot that they could do. And for me, it was more what they missed out on. You know, there was also this incredible bribe to the National Party. Regional Australia is important, but is it only just this week that they've discovered that regional Australia is important? Why wasn't regional Australia and the transition away from fossil fuels part of a big picture story of transition? And, you know, that's where, if we're going to be spending on skills, you know, why do you need to have wages subsidies for apprentices at a time when there's shortages everywhere, You don't give people money to hire, you know, more people because there aren't the people out there to hire. So there's, you know, things that, I guess the point I make is there are things that in there that sound good. You know, a modern manufacturing strategy is expanded, you know, the patent box is expanded, but there's no real substance behind them. And the closer you look at it, and budgets always take you a few days to really get around all of the nitty gritty. Yeah.
So what are the things, I'd have to say that what you like about the budget, one would have to say is equivocal, and you may have damned it slightly with faint praise, but I guess I kind of expected that. What is it though that you think they've got dead wrong? Nikki, what do you reckon that this, I mean, it's a lot of it's spin, it's a lot of illusion, you're worried about the substance, but what spending or what announcements did you go, what the hell are they doing? Were there any?
So the biggest thing for me, obviously, as a member of the Climate Council, is what's the climate policy. And there was nothing new in there whatsoever. If you look at the expenditure, it's all the things that we've had, you know, ARENA, the CFC, ERF, and all of those things, even initiatives like the microgrids for regional communities, 150 million. Well, that's a good initiative and that's sensible, but it's coming out of existing ARENA funding. So across climate change, if you look at expenditure, and I'm not sure how Treasury managed to get this table in there, it is 0.3% of total spending is on these previously announced initiatives with nothing new, 0.3. And in fact, in the 2 out years of the forward estimates, 0.2%, it falls from 2 billion a year down to 1.3 billion. So that's a 35% drop. Yeah. As the spending fades out. You know, on the other side, you've got the government, literally the second point in its summary in budget paper number 1 is saying we're spending $6 billion on flood recovery in northern New South Wales and Queensland. How does that make economic sense? This is supposed to be the government of economic rationalists, and this is the thing that pees me off no end, is they don't understand the economic rationality of acting on climate change, the economic opportunity, the avoidance of being penalised by international tariffs. You know, it just, the list goes on. If you want jobs and growth, invest in new industries. Don't keep going after bloody fossil fuels. Sorry, I get quite upset by this because it's so irrational and so harmful.
Do not apologise. I think your passion is very important. Richard, what do you reckon? What was the thing that stood out for you as the worst? And do you agree with Nikki?
Well, the worst is all the things they didn't mention. Like, we're about to spend $15 billion, $15,000 million a year on the so-called stage 3 tax cuts. They will deliver $9,000 a year to people earning over $200,000. And the Treasurer didn't mention them in his speech, right? Because he announced it a few years ago and it was all off in the never. And at the time he announced it, he gave a little bit of temporary money for low income earners. And this is kind of the trick. You give low income earners a little bit straight away and you say to the rich people, shh, just wait, it's coming. As to why they won't kind of do simple things, I think it's worse than won't. Their comms strategy, and it's not working for them, I think they're going to lose, but the comms strategy that they've developed and the political strategy they've developed over the last couple of years is that in order to motivate their base, in order to get their voters, you know, nicely angry and motivated, they deliberately go out and say, I'm going to chop down the tree you like the most and build a gas-fired power station on it. Because when progressives kind of get angry, then they just go back to their regional Queensland base and say, see, it's us versus them. I'm the only one that will take these people on for you. So for years, they've been deliberately being provocative, like, let's build a new coal mine. Yeah, that'll piss them off. Let's build a coal-fired power station. That'll piss it off. And when you point out it's not economic, no one wants it, it's like, oh, how about we subsidise it then? But this is not stupid. It's very carefully designed. You know, it's agent provocateur type stuff, and it works. But the big problem, and this is the exciting bit, is because independents, thank you, Jane, for running, because independents are running this time, in the upper house, but in the lower house in particular, in so-called safe Liberal seats, all of this chin out, chest puffed up, I'll take on the Greenies for you stuff that Barnaby loves and Matt Canavan loves and Scott Morrison dog whistles about, they're just bleeding votes in Wentworth and North Sydney and Kooyong and Higgins. So they're kind of stuck now because their internal politics needs this masculine, muscular bravado. And because a whole bunch of people who in those safe Liberal seats have just will never vote Labor. They just had to vote Liberal, and therefore they could get away with it. But you put a good independent up, particularly women. I think it's not an accident that these are women candidates coming forward. They are such an obvious alternative to that version of the coalition, and they're bleeding votes, well, spectacularly.
How lovely to hear. I do agree with your analysis that it's tribal and it's macho. It's slightly Trumpist, or a lot Trumpist, perhaps. What do you think, Nikki? Do you agree with Richard's definition of why they seem to do these things where you go, this isn't working for you, why would you keep doing it?
Well, it makes a lot of sense. It's a question I ask myself all the time. I have to say, I do think there is an element of ideology in this, but I get Richard's point about, I mean, it was how many years is it since the deficit disasters we were having? We're back in black, and then all of a sudden budget deficits are fine and we can just grow our way out of them and it doesn't matter. So they change their colours when it suits them. And I think that's the thing about this Prime Minister, is that he's about winning votes. And I think, unfortunately, politicians more broadly, that why people are so disillusioned is because it tends to be about getting back in power. And Australia, unfortunately, is going away from what we had when I was a lot younger, was, politicians with great ideals and the willingness to do reform. And maybe those reforms have just got too hard. But the thing on climate change is, with the Nationals, and certainly with people like Matt Canavan, it is more ideology, because these people are supposed to be economic rationalists. And if they were what they said, it makes no sense for them to be doing what they're doing unless they are deliberate. It is a deliberate political ploy. Whether you call that ideology or not might be a bit about semantics rather than anything else. But I do think there is a, we're not, when they talk about what are we, the inner city cafe, latte sipping cafe going wine bar,
cheese eating something or others. Yes.
Well, I don't eat cheese, but I do drink wine, and that's fine. But yeah, it's these labels of us that we're un-Australian because we want to do something about climate change.
Apparently I hate Australia because I'm worried about the climate.
Well, exactly. We are bad citizens.
Yeah.
But that is the sort of dog whistling and name calling that goes on. But at the same time, they seem to draw a line in the sand on certain things. But I guess Richard makes a good point about, particularly when you think about the debt and deficit, how quickly they change their view on that, even on the NBN, which we're not spending money on this, Labor blew all this stuff. Oh, here's another $500 million for the regions. Here's 1.3 for road, to make sure you can actually drive from Sydney to Dubbo and not lose connection for, half an hour as you get to Dubbo, a major city. Suddenly they get these things, and it's all about the vote. So I guess it's not ideology, it's about winning.
Yeah, it's a game. They see it as a game. Now, I believe Hannah, unfortunately, has been having some trouble with her screen, and it's been freezing. So, oh no, she's back.
I am here. Don't worry. I've made it back in the nick of time.
Because I was just thinking we need to ask some of the questions that are coming up on the Q&A.
Yeah, of course. I can fire some questions for you all for sure. So Denise says, with 3-year election cycles and governments seemingly constantly putting their power and their donors' interests, and perhaps even getting re-elected ahead of the public interest, do you think we'll ever see broad and deep economic change?
It is a problem, and I don't know. I think it's good. I personally think it's good that the states have moved to 4-year cycles, and I think it really helps. If you're constantly having to go into you've got a year, when you're sort of getting settled, and then a year when you could do something, and then a year when you're fighting the election again. you're literally productive, one third of the time, if that. The states have managed to do it. So I don't actually understand why the federal government hasn't, because I would have thought that, both sides would stand to gain from having that fixed term. Maybe I'm being naive about that, and they want to make sure that they can time it exactly to be, when the latest best set of numbers come out. But, I would have thought having that greater stability. The other thing you could do is to take some of those decisions. I mean, some people have suggested things like Infrastructure Australia comes up with this long list of prioritised infrastructure. The government can say, or Treasury can say, we've got this much that we need to spend. We need to prioritise transport in these particular areas, or whatever it is, renewable energy in these particular areas. These are the things that are on the list. Fund these ones, and you take a lot of that decision and the pork barrelling out of the hands of government. Again, maybe that's naive. Maybe you just find that there were political appointments in place and it didn't work. But I wonder if there aren't other things, and taking some of the politics out of the budget document itself. I mean, why do we have to spend time? 6 hours sounds like a long time, but there's a lot in that document. And you're saying, a lot of people are saying, I noticed in the chat, well, the media are ignoring some of these things. But not everybody's, because sometimes you won't spot something for a week because you haven't had a chance to see that particular thing. Like, oh, hold on a minute, that's what they're actually doing with this one. Particularly when you're an independent economist working on your own most of the time. You're trying to work out everything that's in there. So we don't always see, and they bury stuff as well. So it sometimes takes you a little bit of time. Why do we not do what they do in the UK? Here's the accounting measures. They're just there. The policy. The focus on every policy as it's announced, and you get a chance to respond to that throughout the year. Now, you might not have transparency on everything. There's a lot of documents, a lot of policies are announced, but at least you'd have a better chance of having a better eye over what they're doing, and they'd have to justify it instead of dressing it all up in a half-hour speech from the Treasurer, delivered in a tone that sends you to sleep anyway, and his colleagues, by the looks of them last night. I just think we could do some of these things better. The whole political process, but again, maybe I'm the dreamer here.
Look, I disagree. I like 3-year terms. I like elections. I like my parliamentarians to be accountable to me. I think that if we went to 4-year terms, we'd wind up with 8-year Senate terms. I think that's way too long. And people might remember there's certainly, when the last New South Wales state government was in, people were outraged that they had to wait 4 years to vote them out. So I just think that the whole kind of debate we have, the whole language we have about reform and what reform is, it kind of ignores our democratic processes. And I think we need to turn it on its head. I was quite impressed with what Peter Malinauskas said in South Australia during the state election. He kept saying, vote for me, I want to fix the hospitals, but let me guarantee you I won't fix it in one term. Okay, I won't. But what I'll guarantee is I will get on with it as soon as I get elected. I actually think it's good politics to tell the truth and say, I can't fix this big problem next week or next year. Right? The problem is politicians, lobbyists kind of getting their agendas up as some magic pudding silver bullet nonsense that's never going to work. And then politicians over-promising that I'll implement this reform and then everything will be fixed. It's just silly. So I think, personally, I don't think the problem is 3-year terms. I think the problem is that our debate about policy and our debate about reform is just out of touch with reality. Get my pet project built and productivity will go up. What bullshit. It's just not true. So then we spend all this money and guess what? Nothing happens. So people lose faith, people lose confidence. If you want to change the country, it'll take a long time. And as for letting some bureaucrat or, a senior businessman make all my infrastructure choices for me, no, I want a minister to take responsibility. Well, but this is the point. We actually, rather than say, well, politicians are so crap, we'll have to let them outsource it to someone else. Well, no. How about we vote out people who are crap, and when people make promises they can't deliver, we vote them out too. So for me, democracy thrives.
And they just replace each other with the same people. That
Okay,
things.
fine, maybe, no, but other countries are better than this. And we used to be better than this. And other countries have Twitter, right? So democracy thrives on high expectations. And we've now normalised the idea that politicians are crap and government's crap and it's all hopeless. And what we really need is KPMG or to come in or someone. No, exactly. But this idea that some expert's going to come and do it. No, we need ministers to take responsibility for their decisions, implement them. And if they're crap, yes, you vote them out. That's not the end of the world. That's not chaos. That's democracy working. And other countries have Twitter. Other countries have 24-hour news.
Maybe it's about transparency. So if you think about inland rail, for example, if we saw the cost benefit business case for that and the public saw what was written,
but there is no.
So maybe that's what we need is transparency.
Absolutely. We need transparency and accountability. There is no business case for that. And at one point, I remember Barnaby Joyce doing a press conference and it had just blown out by $7 billion. $7 billion. And he went, great news, there'll be more jobs. Right? So, no, but...
I hate Barnaby, you'd have to love him, really.
But, you know, I say it all the time, Norway exists, Denmark exists, Sweden exists, Finland exists. They can roll out infrastructure projects. They can implement reforms. They have Twitter. Right?
But not Murdoch.
No, not Murdoch, exactly. So we might, but again, so let's not change our parliament. Let's, you know, our parliament.
Change our media.
It used to do this fine. You know, let's just, again, stare into the abyss and think, well, what is actually stopping us? But I don't think it's 3-year terms.
Well, that actually leads perfectly into a question here from Mark. Who asks, is there ever a sense that there'll be accountability for all of this wealth transfer over and above electoral consequences? You know, we're still waiting on a Federal Integrity Commission, for example. What will it take to have that transparency and accountability we need? And will an ICAC be enough?
I don't know if it'll be enough, but it'd be better than nothing. You know.
Yeah. I think how hard they're fighting to not have one is proof of how important it is.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, they actually promised one, right? They actually committed to one. And think about all the political pain they're willing to take to not implement a promise they've already made. I mean, if that doesn't scare the bejesus out of you, nothing should. So I don't think for a minute that one corruption watchdog will be the be all and end all, but there's no doubt that, you know, in Australia, you know, we have oligarchs in Australia, but, you know, they're too powerful to be called a pejorative. We have nested relationships between former senior public servants, their former regulator and the new businesses they're lobbying for. I mean, and you know, without the power to compel documents, without the power to tap phones, without the power to tell people to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth on fear of going to jail.
Including in political advertising, that'd be good.
But people have convinced themselves that if I'm never going to give Jane up and Jane's never going to give me up, no one's ever going to know what we cooked up. That only works when no one actually is above us saying, I'll have all your emails, thanks. I'll have all your phone records, thanks. And by the way, I'm bringing your partner in and putting them under oath and telling them they're going to go to jail if they tell a lie. That's why they're afraid of this stuff.
Yeah, well, it's working in the States. So, you know, we've uncovered a huge amount of corruption, and it may not be everything. It may be only the tip of the iceberg, but it's, as I said, better than nothing.
Absolutely.
They must be terrified.
Well, and also, sorry to keep going on about, the thing that's really important, there's no doubt that the New South Wales ICAC deters a lot of corruption. Right? It's not just catching it. Yeah. I know that New South Wales politicians think differently than federal politicians. I know the things that New South Wales politicians get awkward talking about for fear that at any point in time they might be being listened to, compared to federal politicians that think, you know, they're untouchable. And I don't mean I'm cooking up bribes on the phone. I just mean that they want to be heard to speak with integrity on every call they're on, because they never, ever know who's listening. So deterring is as good as catching. And
the New South Wales ICAC has had its teeth somewhat filed over the last few years because it had such an effect on some of the politicians.
Correct.
And it remains, even with some of its teeth removed, a deterrent. So it's a really important.
Brought down a premier, so
it's brought down a couple, in fact. One of them over a bottle of Grange, which is still the strangest thing that has ever happened in New South Wales.
I think that was self-sabotage, but anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, I agree. Anna, I think we're out of time, aren't we? Or will we do one more question?
I think we are really approaching the time limit. Can I squeeze one more question in here from Jalinda, who says, "Excuse me for not forensically ploughing through the budget details. You are forgiven. I don't think anyone has had time to do it all yet." Is there anything in the budget that we've seen so far that will improve the financial security for many women, especially single women over 50? Because I know that this is an issue that is very close to your heart, Jane, and an issue that we are very passionate about at Reason in general. So is there any hope in this budget that we can see so far?
Well, I looked through the Women's Economic Security Statement, or the Women's Budget Statement, as it's called this year. And look, there's a lot in there on domestic and family violence and violence against women. And that's not an area that I'm an expert in, but there seems to be a lot of issues that were considered. I think it's unfortunate, and obviously that's to be welcomed. I think it's unfortunate that the rules around paid parental leave, I think, actually make things potentially worse, not better. If you just share between men and women, you're not going to get the right outcome. You potentially put more men off. And I would have liked to have seen something like the Grattan proposal to have 16 weeks each, and a bonus if men or the second partner rather take their full share. The 2-week bonus would have made a lot more sense. Things like superannuation on parental leave payments would have been a good step. So, there's a little bit of funding for childcare or to research around childcare in regional areas, which is probably not a bad thing. But, this is sort of the government going, what do we have problems with? There's, does everyone have a kitchen table? I don't have a kitchen table, but people around the kitchen table are talking about prices, so we'll give them some money. People are talking about petrol prices, so we'll cut the excise. People are worried about the tradies are worried about how much they've got, so we'll make sure the asset write-off goes for another. Well, actually, that was an extension, but they've targeted what they've said, and of course with women, it's like, women are a problem for us. What can we put in there that looks like we're doing something? And I don't want to undercut the stuff on family violence at all, but there's a lot again of speech and bump in there that says, we've done all this stuff to help women get more into executive positions. We've done more to help women rise up through, to do different courses and to change it. They haven't done anything. What have they done? It's all rhetoric. And the meaningful things that they could have done, particularly around, paid leave, superannuation, they will not help. The, housing is something we haven't talked about much tonight, but this is obviously a massive problem, and it is a multi-government problem. It's not just federal government, but they could certainly do more. Handing single parents loans at 2% deposit as the market is peaking and potentially unemployment, there are some risks around shocks to the economy and the withdrawal of stimulus. What could possibly go wrong? Now, there are these schemes and some of them work, but they need to be very, very carefully managed. Indigenous Business Australia has a really good scheme on this front, but it's 5%. I just think they're playing with people's lives, but there's nothing in here that changes the outlook for a woman who's on a low wage, who has her career disrupted, who doesn't have sufficient superannuation, who may end up divorced without or separated without a home. And we know that, this is the fastest growing cohort of homeless, but we also know that, young people I think, Richard, you've talked about this earlier tonight, are without, and I don't know why, Hannah, you should be leading the charge. Young people should be out there, on the streets, asking all levels of government to do something about this. And first homeowners grants actually makes the problem worse, not better.
They send the cost up. But,
the government is doing nothing. Again, it's a band-aid, an apparent band-aid measure with a whole load of marketing spin around it. So is there anything that will help women? No, I could have said that, just no. But I do think the domestic violence stuff is important. So there is that.
There is some good domestic violence stuff in there. It's been heralded by a lot of the sector. I know there's going to be the first ever hospital for trauma recovery in the old Illawarra, which is a really good. So there are some good little things happening in there, but they've, people have worked incredibly hard to get that action. But the problem is you can't encourage people to leave violent and abusive relationships if you don't give them somewhere safe to go. And what we continually fall down on is giving people somewhere safe to go and the confidence that they'll have money if they do try to leave. And so women don't. And they also risk losing their children if they haven't got safe housing, and if they haven't got enough income, they can leave an abusive man only to find that the powers that be give their children back to the abuser. It's a horrible circle, and there's nothing much being done about it. It's one of the things I'll be talking about a lot. Richard, do you want to have a quick last word, and then I think we've really done our time?
Yeah, sure. Look, let's be crystal clear. There was nothing in the budget to help women over 50s improve their retirement incomes because we don't want to. Right? We don't want to. The superannuation system is a contributions-based system where people who earn more put more in. This means that people who earn less will always have the least. And then we take so that magnifies over a lifetime. And then the tax concessions come in and make it worse because we give more tax concessions to boost the retirement incomes of higher income people, brackets more likely to be blokes. So it's heresy in Australia because whether you're from the Labor Party or the Liberal Party, the finance sector, the lawyers, the accountants, everyone makes so much money and loves superannuation so much. But the superannuation system we've built in Australia takes a magnifying glass to inequality during your working life and makes it far worse when you retire. So if you made the choice to go into the low-paid care sector, if you made the choice to take time off to care for your kids, if you made the choice to take time out of the labour market to care for a parent when you got older, you will be punished for all of those choices. And we just pretend it's not so, and writing glossy booklets for how to help women make better financial choices. No, but the system is that really the choice is don't be a woman.
Yeah.
And that's what but there's so much money being made and so much tax being avoided by people who love the system the way it is. We should be moving to a grants-based contribution scheme where the government puts more money into women with small retirements than they give to me. But let's be clear, today I get
you mean like funding schools according to need?
Exactly. But I get more. So thank you everyone out there for your enormous, generous contribution to my superannuation. It's very kind of you. I don't need it. I'm not asking for it. But taxpayers are giving me an enormous amount of tax concessions to help boost my retirement income. And a woman earning 40 grand is getting virtually nothing. And that's why it's bad and no one wants to talk about it.
Well, we do, and we have been. And thank you both so much for your wonderful, irreverent, straight-talking analysis, smart analysis of, what struck me as a bizarre and lackluster and sort of nasty little budget, full of nasty little slaps for people they don't like. We didn't even talk about the 20% cut to the arts sector. And now we haven't got time, but that was pretty nasty and egregious too. Anyway, I'll shut up and let Hannah close our webinar.
Oh no, really, you've said it all. Thank you so much, Richard and Nikki, for offering such wonderful insight tonight and shed a little bit of light over the mysterious enigma that is the federal budget. So thank you so much. Thank you, Jane, for hosting as always, and thank you everyone.
Thank you, Hannah.
Oh, of course, it's my pleasure. Everyone watching at home, thank you so much for your questions. And of course, we will be back next week doing this all again. In the meantime, if you would like to get involved in Jane's campaign for Reason Australia, then you need to just follow Jane on Twitter, hit the janecaro4reason.com.au website if you would like to donate or volunteer or just keep up to date with what we're doing. Thank you once again to all three of you. And thank you for watching at home. And we'll see you all next week.
And it'll be up on YouTube in a couple of days if you want to watch it again.
Thanks,
It
Anna.
will indeed.
Thanks, Nikki.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you both. See you later. Thanks everyone who joined in.
Night.
Bye.